Uh, yeah, cool. So we're going to have a quick look at kind of remote network analysis, how things have progressed over the years, where we kind of were, where we are now, and I guess hopefully maybe what we can see kind of going forward too. So yeah, that's what we're going to have a look at today. So I'm Dan Jones. I'm SE Director for EMEA at Harmina. And what does that mean? I don't know. I always call myself the doorman. People want to know about Harmina, and then I go and talk to this person, or introduce you to that person, or I just swiftly move myself out of the way and kind of do it. We've got Jerry and Andrew here from Harmina too. And Harry, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Harry. I work for a company called Elevate. I am the wireless solutions architect. I also have no idea what that means, but just don't tell them that. But yeah, so my job effectively is all about Wi-Fi design, as you guys are probably aware. I'm relatively new to the business, but I'm also involved in a lot of troubleshooting, and helping the business create more Wi-Fi specialist engineers to troubleshoot as well.
Nice. Awesome. Sounds good. Okay, great. So I think like jumping into the kind of content that we've got today, right? I was thinking back on the kind of evolution of remote kind of analysis, right? So the old way was boots on the ground. It was like the only option that we had, right? Someone would have a problem, they would call a help desk or call like an MSP or something to come in and have a look at them. And it would literally be, okay, well, the only way I can help support this is I have to get in my car, in my vehicle, and go to site and then start kind of looking at things. And by the time that you've kind of got there, right, the problem's not happened because it was an intermittent fault or something else like this. You go there to go and do some spectrum analysis or packet capture or something like that, and then you find that you now don't have the answers you need. So you might then go, right, okay, well, while I'm here, I'll do a survey, I'll capture what I can of the environment, and then I'll go away and I'll do some kind of analysis or something like that, right? And that was fine. That was the kind of like, I guess, like the middle era, right? So you would turn up, you would just have, what was available to you right then, what you can see, what's happening in the first instance. Then you'd go, right, okay, let's get this kind of middle part done. Let's do a survey. Let's get some information so that I can go back armed with more information. But the problem is it's still backwards looking, right? You're always working with yesterday's data or how it was rather than how it is. And I think that's the kind of step change that we've seen with Harmony Live View, is this kind of idea of real-time visibility, right? And there's been a lot of these kind of cloud vendors that have been adding this kind of stuff into, right? So rather than it being something that's kind of retrospective or done after the fact, what we're trying to do now is kind of bubble to the surface the information that you need live as it's happening. Or even, with some vendors, they might do like a streaming packet capture or something like that, so that you capture it when it happens and then surface it to you. And so, yeah, I think like that also requires us as engineers, right, to think about that kind of mental shift, right? We've been so used to being retroactive, doing things afterwards, collecting data and then going away and analyzing and stuff. And I think like there needs to almost be like a mental kind of change within us to kind of think about, okay, that was how we did things. How now can we do things with the tools and the vendors, the APIs, the MCPs, the AI, all this kind of stuff that we have available to us now. So, Harry, I mean, you've been kind of in this space for a while, right? This kind of troubleshooting. I'm assuming you've quite often been on the other end of a call where someone says, "It's not working. What do we do?"
Yeah.
Um, what do you think the biggest shift's been? In terms of like the tooling, things like that, but also like the mind. I guess like the mindset, right, of the engineer. Do you think that's caught up with the tooling stuff that we've got?
Well, I think what you said was right in regards to we if you ever got called out to a troubleshooting fault, you're always there after the fact, and that can, number one, be quite frustrating for a customer because then you've got to almost try and replicate the fault opposed to seeing
Mm,
it there and then. which used to drive, and sometimes customers can get quite frustrated, quite, irritable about that, and you totally understand that. So there was always that kind of element to it. And sometimes you go all the way out to site and there's not even a fault really at all. It could be something completely different, but you don't know. And then then you've got kind of the rise of this kind of the on-site survey, and then there's almost sometimes a little bit of a miscommunication with that, where people assume an on-site survey is going to find all issues.
Right.
Oh, I've done a
Yeah.
survey now, so that's it. Once that's done, we know what their problem's going to be. Then you've got that awkward conversation of doing a site survey and not actually seeing any issue that you can,
Just go, everything
yeah,
looks
oh,
great. Yeah.
everything's green, it's amazing, look at that, it's perfect. So yeah, I think so I think that's kind of where that middle ground has come. And then with the API stuff, in regards to like, kind of any vendor of choice, obviously I generally work with Juniper, but what you've got is, unless you kind of know what you're looking for, that's,
Mhm.
which then you require somebody to kind of have their finger on the pulse and they really know what it is they're deep diving, because you know these vendors give you a lot of information and it sometimes can be quite difficult to figure out what you're actually looking for. So I
Yeah.
think that's where it is from my point of view, having those tools to help me get there a little bit quicker, or even sometimes point me in the direction of the actual fault, is hugely beneficial.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Let me, I'll tell you what I'll do. Let me share my screen. What I've done is I've pulled up a site that we've got access to here. Let me just show you this. So this is us using the live view, right? So this is us being able to take our kind of 3D model that we've got from our simulation, from our design, and then now what we're doing is we're pulling all of that data through from the APIs to give us the kind of live information that we see, right? So if I pull out everything on top of this, what we get is the live information that's coming directly from the thing. Now, why is that important? Well, the kind of nice thing is, this is over in Finland. I'm in the UK. Straight away, the thing that I find useful is like I can go and see, is there an obvious issue that I'm seeing here? So let's go to something like channel utilization. Is there an obvious issue I'm seeing in terms of the amount of spectrum that's available in this space, right? Is it worth there being a truck roll? Because if I, load this up and I see the whole map is bright red because the whole place is massively overutilized, I go, right, okay, I can see why there's an issue, right? I don't have to kind of think about that. And I can go, okay, it looks like, I know what the problem is going to be. I don't necessarily have to kind of go to site to figure that out. The other thing is being able to pull up the clients, right? And being able to see what's their experience of the network. So being able to kind of go through and kind of see, right, okay, am I seeing something here that kind of, well, there you go. Look, I'm seeing high retries on this particular client, right? You can see that they're right out on the sell edge by the looks of things. They're not having the best of time here. And again, this could be a really useful kind of troubleshooting tool, just being able to be completely remote. I think like one of the things that I see when I'm talking to people about live view is them, I guess, having to make that mental shift that I spoke about, right, Harry? Like they might understand, okay, why do I need to see this in like a picture view, right? In the vendor dashboard, I've got all my table of numbers and things like that. For you, like what's the difference about having it as like a visual context rather than just kind of numbers on a page?
Well, the visual aspect, where it's hugely beneficial to me, is going through it with a non Wi-Fi person, I suppose, for want of a better phrase. I mean, somebody who doesn't, either the customer, I've many a time I've showed live view to the customer, just to really give them an understanding of the tools we have at our disposal to look for these faults. Because one of the big ones I used to always get pushback, and we still get in now, is you will ask a customer, especially an end user that might not be it may be a cohabitable space, might be a co-working solution. The customer's phoning up having a problem. We're asking for things like their MAC address. They're getting frustrated, almost like we're kicking the can down the road. We're not actually solving the issue. We're trying to, do you know what I mean? Trying to hope the issue goes away. So we'll keep asking things. And then when you get things like their MAC address, things like their device profile. You can show them there's a reason we collect this data, and the reason we have this data makes us obviously be able to try and diagnose a fault. So I use this very much to be able to, as a visual aid to the customer
Mm.
and to our some of the people in our knock who might not be completely versed in Wi-Fi just yet. And that's where going through a vendor dashboard can be quite confusing, because there's so many nooks and crannies you can go down. There's a rabbit holes galore you can go down, and where this can actually point you quite quickly in that, okay, well, that's red.
Yeah.
Use that traffic light system to kind of, which we're now used to. It kind of tricks our brain into go, oh, that's red. Maybe I should look at that and see. And then you've got a good starting point.
Yeah, yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that kind of education piece, I think, is a massively like underutilized, under kind of thought about thing. And like as in terms of that kind of mindset thing I keep going back to, I think that's a big part of it, right? Is like it's not just a thing for necessarily Wi-Fi engineers, right? It's a great visual tool for you to be able to explain to someone, not again what happened when I was there last time, but like, hey, this is happening right now. One of the things that you have the ability to do is to actually kind of save your API key and share that in a report, so that you can again send it to someone who isn't as versed, and you can go, hey, look, this is what's happening on the on the site right now. You see this big kind of red splodge, like that's the bit that's having the problem, and this is why it's having that problem, right? So they get to see that kind of visual context of what's going on.
I think
um
it touches on the what I said about the site survey, which is obviously extremely important. They offer a huge amount of value, but it is a snapshot in time. It was
yeah,
surveyed when I was on site. That was how the network looked, and a bit like they used to say when used to buy a laptop, the moment you walk out the store, it's out of date. And that was
yeah,
it's a bit like that. The same with the site survey. You walk out, but by the time I've left site, that as valuable as that data is, it's now out of date.
yeah,
So, and that's where this kind of that live view kind of fixes that problem.
yeah. Yeah, I think like if I kind of take that on to like the next stage, I think again that mindset kind of change in terms of thinking about why we do surveys, right? Before it was always, okay, we're doing a survey to see how the network is performing, right? Or okay, I need to get some measurements so that I can do my design, so that I can put accurate kind of walls in and things like that, so I get a better design and things. I think now, like, so in the survey here, being able to see, okay, this is how RF is kind of interacting with that environment, right? So as I click on different APs, I can see how things are working. Again, this is just a snapshot in time, right? So when I go here, I can see, okay, this is when Joel did this survey. And that's great to have like a historical list of all the surveys that you've done within a space. You can see how the kind of networks evolved over time and stuff like that. But I think like the more important thing is being able to like use that within the actual kind of design phase of things, right, in the first place. So, I can come in and I can just delete everything out of there. And because we've got that survey data, and this could have been done, before we make any changes and things like that, go and use the existing Wi-Fi network, come in, have a look at how the Wi-Fi is actually going to work. So without having to draw any walls or anything, because we're using that real survey data, we can see how the attenuation affects that space without having to kind of go through and draw all the walls, right? Because now we're using that real world data that we've collected. Well, that's all kind of well and good, but the next phase on from that is then being able to use that attenuation data and use the design, the kind of digital twin, I think is the word that people use, right? To now have a look at the live data, right? So I can click on a particular AP, and now this is, okay, it looks like it's using the walls and things, but actually this is using the real world survey data that we collected. So if I go in here, this is actually using the survey data. And with Juniper, it's actually using the AP to AP data as well, right? So you're building out that complete picture of what's going on. And now, yes, you still get that snapshot in time from the survey, but effectively what you're building is an attenuation map of that space, right? So now we know how RF works. So then when you come in and you go, right, okay, what is RRM doing to this space? You can come in and see, right, okay, this is the AP right now. This is how it's working. This is the conducted power on each radio. And now I can see the heat map of what's happening there. But I can also come in and have a look at, okay, what kind of utilization is happening and what's the blast radius of that utilization. So again, for me, like this is one of the kind of the most useful things to be able to come in and see is like, okay, I'm on 2.4 obviously because I needed a place that's got loads of utilization, right? But I've come into this so that I can see, and now I've got that visual context of what's the blast radius, how is that actually kind of, what area is that impacting? Because if it's only impacting, say, a corridor or something like that, and I don't have voice clients that need to be connected through corridors, do I care? Probably not. I might be okay with that. But if I've got, a big area down here where all of the workspace is, and that's massively over capacity, that might cause a problem, right? Um, so yeah, that for me is like the ability to take those, I still think that something like a validation survey after you've installed is super, super important. It's really good to have that snapshot in time of like, okay, this was how I designed it, this is how it was installed, this is how it was working, the day, the week after that kind of happened. But then being able to take that data that you've collected and be able to use it and recycle it again for that live view. I think like how does that help you, Harry, as like someone that's working as like an MSP, right? How does that help you, I guess, one, to justify doing that validation survey in the first place, but then also like that ongoing value that you might get from it with your customers after that?
Well, so like the validation, I mean, to me, a validation is almost the most important thing we can do. Really, I mean, because especially if you build any type of design on, a predictive model, you have to be able to validate it. And because we are going to get things wrong, and walls, materials, behaviors change, and they sometimes are not what you expect. And I recently had to do a design for a room that I had to go and look at a site that we weren't made aware that the walls were going to be covered in soundproofing. Well, as you can imagine, that completely changed the way that the design worked. So without validation, we're never going to know that. But you can, because it's generally a snapshot in time, and you might not see the issue that customers are experiencing within just the RF survey. This is when the
Mm.
live view kind of comes into its own, because sometimes, if a customer's got a relatively complex problem or something that may be intermittent, they just want to be believed sometimes. Do you know what I mean? And a lot of time we can easily dismiss,
Yeah,
I mean, especially nowadays where we've got so many different devices, so many different things on the network, we can easily say, look, it's just your device that's causing the problem. We can dismiss them where that kind of live, because we don't have the resources to have an engineer sat on site all day, every day, just trying to find a potential issue that may, happen rarely. So
yeah,
that's where I feel live view then comes into its own, because you can actually sit there all day, every day, watching a site when it's no cost to the business, because you can do other things. And I have done that. I've looked at a site over a span of a day, every kind of checking in on it every hour, because we have an intermittent fault. Because I wanted to be able
mm,
to see if we could detect that fault, and we did. Well, we detected the start of the fault, and with more investigation than going to site, we've managed to kind of figure that out. And but that was made possible by having something like Live View, where I could cast my eye over it occasionally without having to sit on
yeah,
site all day with it, and because if you sit on site all day and you don't replicate the fault, then what do? Go back again and do it again? It can be never ending. Do you know what I mean? But the important thing is the customer wants to be believed that there is a problem,
mhm,
and I think that's where it kind of comes into its own, really.
yeah, yeah. Jerry, have you heard like many kind of, I guess, ways that people are using live view, how that might have changed their workflows, stuff like that? Have you had any kind of feedback on, I guess, like useful things that people from the webinar can like take away? Okay, this is where this slots in.
Yeah, I think Harry raised a good point around like just so one side of it is obviously us as engineers digesting that information to help us to understand what the problem is. But I think the point that Harry raised that I liked is like it also enables us to be able to potentially like articulate an issue to like the the customer or whoever is that, stakeholders or whatever that we're trying to convey like an information, where if we're just showing them like, text in logs and things like that, like it's very hard to try to convey, here's why this is happening, here's why this is, a problem or this behavior, and this is why this is, this experience. So I think there's that piece of it that's very useful in just being able to, not even so much for us to make it easier for us to identify these problems, which I think it does help, but two, just to be able to more easily articulate this information to other people that are maybe less kind of technical, that need to understand this. And then the other side of it that I think is really interesting is the going from the live view to the simulation and the value that that brings, of being
Mm.
able to, okay, here's the current situation, here's what the environment looks like currently, how we can now flip from that into what I like to call the sandbox mode, where now we can play around with things without impacting production, and how quickly and simply we can go from live to simulation and mirror that live environment into simulation, and then come up with whatever remediation plan we want. We can play with all sorts of things. We can start with just adjusting the configuration knobs of like power levels, and then we can move into more, complex things of moves, adds, and changes, right? Of actually physically moving an AP or adding an AP or potentially removing an AP. And we can simulate all those different scenarios very quickly based off of that live information. So I think those are probably the two new workflows that I see the live side bringing, that adds the most kind of immediate value to those kind of things. Beyond that, I would say more niche things, or at least for some people, is going to be like events. If you're monitoring events, this gives
Mm.
us a whole new way of kind of monitoring the entire event space, or a particular, let's say like a keynote session at the event of what's happening. Like you can't just go easily like survey, those types of events in those spaces. So I think having that live whole holistic view of the network during an event is really powerful as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Well, I think what
definitely.
Jerry said then is dead right. Having that simulation view is it's almost like having your own kind of the dummy org of that live site, and it is great to be able to go in and to be able to redesign off of it and go, right, actually, if I kind of move these here or maybe add this there, how's that going to then impact, and that is something we've actually done recently to mitigate problems,
Mm.
by having that flip between, and even the flip between all three views, having the survey, having the live, and then going back to simulation and making those tweaks and changes to go, okay, actually, this is going to work the way I think it's going to work.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. Um, yeah, I think you're right, Jerry. Like I guess like something that people don't realize is that if you go to your live tab and you literally copy and then paste into your simulation, we bring all the config, the channels, the power levels, like everything, we bring it over. So yeah, like the ability then to go, right, okay, especially if you've done the survey, right? So you've got that built-in like attenuation model. Now you can really start to play with, oh, okay, let's have a go at messing this around, which is I guess what you're going to show us now, which is
Yeah, let
awesome.
me just kind of walk through what that workflow would look like in Hamina. So I'm going to start with nothing just to show you how quickly you can get up and running. So all I did here was create a new project. I already had my credentials in. I just grabbed one of my lab instances here, the Juniper Mist one. And then we could say, okay, we'll choose like our Helsinki office, pull in floor 5. We can add the orb integration if we want. Not really applicable for this particular demo, but that easily I can layer in additional insights into this analysis. But now it's going to go out to Juniper Mist in this example and go pull in everything it can learn about this site, from the AP, the equipment locations, what switches they're connected to, how the APs are hearing the other APs in the environment, how they're hearing the clients throughout the space. So all sorts of analysis details, right, that we can then visualize this. And I know Dan already kind of went through some of this stuff already, but like then what we can do is once it's created this model for me, there it goes, just finished. So it didn't learn all of this from Juniper Mist, but it learned enough for Hamina then to kind of work its magic to kind of fill in the gaps of where are the walls, doors, elevators, stairs, bathrooms, all this kind of stuff to build a more accurate heat map here. And then from there, we can come in here and say, what model do we want to use? Do we want to use like the AP to AP information? Do we want to just use the simulated walls and objects? If we had the survey data in here, that would even give us more details. So we can really make this model be super, super accurate to help us with these kind of then predictions. So if I want to come over here to like simulation now, in the simulation side, notice how when I go from live to simulation, nothing changes, right? And that's the key here. So it took everything that it learned about this site from the live view, and now that we're looking at it in simulation, the only thing that's changing is we're now in the sandbox and I can play with whatever I want. I can do drastic things like move an axis point and see how that changes things. I could just take this axis point with its current configuration. This is how this axis point is currently actually deployed. We learned that all from the live view. I can see the power levels of each of the radio. I'm looking at 5 gigahertz. So let's say I want to simulate maybe turning the power down in this radio, and I can see how that would change things. If I want to simulate cranking the power up on here and seeing how far I can cover, maybe we've got an AP, that went offline, and I need to see, hey, maybe for the short term, maybe we can kind of improve the environment by turning the power up on some APs in that area to kind of help fill that hole that's been created by an AP that's down. So we could run through some scenarios like that. Let's bring this guy back down and let's say, okay, here's a little pocket here. For whatever reason, this is a super critical area. Every time users go into that area, they're complaining about the Wi-Fi. We can validate some of that user experience then by modeling that type of client, modeling the
That's where UC's desk is, isn't it? We put him out in the corridor.
yeah, the corner over here. So yeah, we can see like not the greatest user experience here. I mean, it's okay. It's 5 gigahertz, it's minus 68. But let's say we want to really make that area sing with some better Wi-Fi experience. So yeah, we could look at maybe just turning up the power, right, of like the closest AP. So if I put my mouse over here, it's going to tell me which AP is actually the closest to that area. If you look in the bottom left, it's actually the AP named toilets, which we could then show on the map here. So again, it learned all of this from that Juniper Mist integration in this case, but with whatever vendor you're using that's supported on live, we pulled in all the AP names. So it got all these names from there. So I can see when I put my mouse over here, that's our strongest AP. Maybe we even want to look at secondary signal, right? And see what's the second strongest in that area. So now we can see, okay, toilets is the strongest. Phone booths is actually the second strongest, which is this AP down here. So maybe we want to start with that one and turn up the power from our second strongest AP. I'll bump it up, 3 or 4 dBs, and now we can see what that did for me. And now we can see, yeah, we do have primary signal of minus 64, secondary signal of minus 67. So now if we take like our client here and we put them back, let me turn them off and on again. So that way they reconnect on 5 gigahertz. And now we can see as they go into this area here, we should now see a little bit better. Yeah, well, this is on the 5 gigahertz on, yeah, so it's staying connected on that, hasn't roamed, right? So actually, I did this the wrong way. What I should have actually done is turn the power down to actually get a roam here to happen is what I wanted to actually see. So if we come here, we'll put our client, let's say they start over here, get them on 5 gigahertz. Now, as we move over here, yeah, it looks like they're still going to be in that roaming boundary. So this is where you can also play around with this of seeing, okay, we're on an iPhone. The roaming boundary is going to be that blue area. So we can see how we haven't lowered that power enough to hit that roaming threshold. So we could figure out exactly what we need to set this radio to get us in that boundary. And so now if we bring our client back to here, you can run through these different scenarios. And this is what I like about that kind of sandbox mode. So we can get that signal dialed in exactly the way we want. And now as I was actually dealing with this exact support case with Hamina, and they were looking at the live data and they're like, yeah, we keep seeing these clients roaming to the wrong AP or sticking to the wrong AP, and we need to figure out how we remediate this issue. This is exactly how I would do this, is being able to simulate these different kind of changes to figure out exactly what power level changes do we need to make sure we get those roaming kind of thresholds, those roaming triggers where we want them to happen based on the user's kind of workflow and walking paths through the environment here.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think again, like one of the things that maybe we don't talk about enough is that we're looking at both directions on that link, right? We're looking at the uplink and the downlink. So we have this link direction that says worst link, and that
Yep.
basically is just telling you whichever one's worse, right? That's the one we'll show you. So again, I think this is something that we're not very good at kind of like explaining, hey, you know, it's always a two-way kind of conversation, right? It's not always AP down to client. Actually, sometimes it's the client up to the AP, and that might be the restricting factor here, right? And so, like you did, Jerry, where you turn down the AP, that helps to balance that, link between the client and the AP. So, I mean, that's one way of doing it, Jerry. Like, obviously, we've got the uplink and the downlink heat maps as well, right? So we can show how that will work that way as well. Do you want to just quickly kind of show how that works?
Yeah. So you're talking here where if we go primary coverage, currently we're looking at downlink. So this is the traditional, we'll say, kind of view of like a heat map, where this is how do we expect the clients to hear the APs versus if we flip that and we say, okay, here's the uplink, and that's going to be dependent on, what is the client like transmit power, for example, of how those APs are expected to hear the clients based in those locations. So if you have a client that has a limited amount of transmit power, you can specify that here. So you can simulate, a specific kind of client capability in this kind of testing. So if we were to bump up the power, for example, now we're saying this is how those APs would be expected to hear those clients in that particular area.
Yeah. And where I found that really useful is like in like a warehouse scenario, right? Where you might have, you know, clients that have got terrible antennas. And when you kind of record the RSSI from that client, you've got this massive dip in basically transmit from the client, right? And so then you can, within your warehouse environment, you can show, right, okay, this is how, the client is hearing the AP, for instance, but actually in terms of the amount of power that that client's got to actually push data back up to the AP, it might be, really offset.
Yep.
And yeah, just again, great for us as engineers, but also a really, really useful tool to be able to show a customer, like, this is why we're having this issue in this space, right? And being able to kind of give them that heat map so they can understand what that problem is and things. Okay, so I guess I've got a question for you again, Harry. Like, do you think that like stuff like this, sometimes there's almost like a risk of too much data? Is there like having this live visibility, does that like create noise that might sometimes slow you down?
I mean, we live in a world now of too much information. Don't we? It's that's you can't throw a stone without getting information about something. But I think, like for me personally, no, I can, like any new bit of tech, you can go overboard with it. You can go too much into the detail. Sometimes simplicity is, you look at the very simple thing and that could potentially be answered. Sometimes we can overcomplicate stuff.
Mm,
Like I mean, like I've touched on before, for me, the whole point of kind of having a live is not only sometimes to point me in the right direction if I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole of, people use AI and like Claude and all these different things. I don't need to type in their problems into that and they go down this amazing AI rabbit hole. But sometimes, the visual element to me can just make me focus on something that I might be going a bit mad, especially like high kind of retry rates and stuff like that. And then you think, oh, my airtime's shooting up, but why am I hitting 90% airtime, but I've only got 9 clients connected to the AP? And it's that can bring me back down to a level to go, actually, let's just start at the basics and work our way back up, opposed to trying to jump in all directions. But I suppose, yeah, it could, I suppose it could make too much noise. But I just don't, in my opinion, I think having that visual cue helps me, and then helps me explain it to the customer a bit easier as well, because I can
yeah.
show a customer. I mean, like what, talking about what Jerry was showing then, the most important, the roaming man. Like, I don't think you guys realize how much the roaming man has improved, especially my kind of way I can explain roaming to a client by just
Mm.
visually showing them how a client potentially will roam.
Having a
And
stick
it's a
man walk
remarkable.
around their space, yeah, it
It
makes a big
seems so
difference. Yeah.
simplistic, but to a customer, to explain customer to the point, to try and explain roaming to someone who's not at all technical, it can be like, I don't know what you're talking about, mate. I honestly don't know what you're talking about. What
Yeah.
do you mean an iPhone's different to a phone's a phone? And and then this you get to actually visually show somebody, right? This is how I want it to work. I've been on loads of demos as well where it hasn't quite worked the way I was hoping it was going to work, and I've gone, oh God, no, this looks awful, like what we're doing. But it's important to understand that things like that. I to explain things to a non-technical person. Obviously, there's a time to explain things technically, but
Yeah.
not everybody's going to understand that. And I work on this premise where I don't ever want to look like I'm trying to be the smartest guy in the room, so I like to make sure it's pretty, people can visually see it, and I think it helps hugely, I think.
Yeah, I think like the thing that I have used this for a lot as well is trying to explain to people just because you're stood under a different AP doesn't mean you're Rome,
Yeah.
right? Like being able to show that, or it's like, oh, I should be connected to this one. It's like, why? Like you've got a good enough connection where you are. Like your device is quite happy where it is. It doesn't need to roam. Um, but yeah, being able to like explain that to people. The other thing that I kind of highlight to people quite a lot, especially in this view, is like you've got your primary association, right, with the blue line, and then the gray lines are like other APs that are good enough.
Yeah.
That if that primary AP isn't, the QBSS load is too high or whatever, those are the other APs that device could be using, right? And I really like the ability to kind of show the redundancy that you can build in as you're kind of designing these things. Jerry, while you've got it open there, one of the things that I kind of get asked about quite a lot is like, how would you do kind of remote analysis of, say, interference, like non-Wi-Fi utilization, if you're completely remote? Like, surely you have to be on site to be able to see if there's other things that are causing problems on the network.
Yeah, so if we jump back over to the live view, I think what you're talking about is like, yeah, if we look at channel utilization, not too much going on. This is over in our offices in Helsinki, so kind of late in the day there, so probably not a lot of people at the office anymore. So not a ton of utilization on 5. Let's take a look at 2.4, because usually there's always some kind of utilization going on in 2.4, whether it's Wi-Fi or non-Wi-Fi. So let's look at this, and if we look at this view here right now, we're looking at channel utilization, and we're combining both channel utilization that's caused by Wi-Fi traffic as well as by non-Wi-Fi traffic. So then from there, we could filter down and say, okay, we see some higher utilization over here. If I put my mouse in this kind of orangish area, you can see it's right at that kind of tipping point of like from 49 to 50%. It's at 49% there. I bet you even if I re-update this, it might change. So let's just take a look. I just did a refresh there of the data. And yeah, look at that. It dropped by 2%. It was at 49% and now it's down to 47%. So this is live, channel utilization there that's being reported. So we can always like see, okay, was that just a blip, when we first pulled the information, or is that like sustained channel utilization? So that's one piece of it. But then from there, if we want to filter down and say, okay, is that utilization coming from Wi-Fi or from non-Wi-Fi? So I filtered out the Wi-Fi now and said, okay, just show me utilization that's from non-Wi-Fi traffic. And here we can see there's a little bit on the channel there, but it's only 6% of it there of non-Wi-Fi, where the majority of that traffic is all coming from actual, demodulated, Wi-Fi frames that it's actually receiving there. So we can be pretty confident in this particular demo example that this is actual Wi-Fi traffic, at least the majority of it. So from a spectrum analysis standpoint, if I went and looked on a spectrum analyzer, it's not going to really show me anything. I wouldn't expect to see anything on this particular channel because we can see the utilization that's being measured on that channel is able to be decoded and see that it's actual genuine Wi-Fi traffic. I'm sure there's some stuff of like, some Bluetooth and things like that, some frequency hopping stuff. And that's where we're seeing some other non-Wi-Fi energy on the channel, but it's not like a microwave oven that's blasting on that channel that's using up 100% of the airtime, all that kind of stuff. So this to me would not warrant like going and sending somebody on site with a spectrum analyzer, right? There's no clues here that says, hey, we need to investigate this from a spectrum analysis, like layer 1 perspective if some users are experiencing issues on the network here. Is that kind of what you're after, Dan?
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, it's again like a lot of sending someone to site is expensive, right? So what you're always trying to balance is, okay, does this warrant actually putting someone in a truck and making them go out there to see what's going on, right? And I think like the more data you can get remotely to be able to make an informed decision about whether it's worth doing that or not, that's always going to be a good thing, right?
Yep.
It's not just expensive, is it? It's also time consuming.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
and that's also the thing. I mean, if the amount of like if you a fault where you sent an engineer, you got to wait till the next day the engineer to go, and then he's going to sit on site and try and find that fault. Where you think, oh, I could actually find that fault. Potentially, I find that fault in a couple of minutes by the comfort of my own desk. Is not only does not only that save the company money, as in your company, the headaches it solves for the customer. They're paramount. That like you know you can't put a price on that to be able to
yeah,
say I've solved this issue without having to truck roll. Where traditionally that was all we did was truck roll
yeah,
because what else could you do? Or you'd send an engineer with a just a laptop and hope somebody a lot smarter than you in your kind of knock would just be able to figure it out in remotely. And so now obviously we can avoid that luxury.
yeah, yeah. Andrew, you very, very, very Britishly have just put your hand up to ask if you can ask a question, which is so good. Thank
Are
you
you
for
gonna
that.
are you
Yeah.
gonna ask? Can you go to the toilet?
No, I've already gone.
Oh,
I was conscious of the time, and we've got some questions in the chat that I thought would be
great.
over the team to talk through.
Yeah, let's
So
do it.
it certainly wasn't. Jerry's just replying to it now, but I was gonna ask it live. This wasn't at the start of the queue, but you've just been going through Roaming Man, so I'll bring it up now. Nick Smith basically says in the example where the client was not roaming AP, how do you try and encourage? What have we got in Wi-Fi that can encourage their client to not be stuck to the wrong AP there?
Yeah. So yeah, I think this is an important topic, and I think it's important to show how Hamina can help with this kind of simulation of dialing this in, right? So we're in the sandbox mode, we're in the simulation, so we can do whatever we want here. But yeah, help us, yeah, kind of guide us in a particular client. So in this example, I'm using an iPhone. But yeah, we could specify what that client capability is to kind of help fine tune this. But yeah, in this example, you can see, yeah, this client's hanging out directly underneath this AP. It's connected back to this AP. And yeah, how often do we try to troubleshoot this stuff? And it's like, yeah, I'm standing right underneath the AP. Why is it not connecting to that AP? And then you do something like this and you start walking away from that AP. And then we get to here, and now it connects to that AP. And you're like, what the heck? Why would it connect to that AP while I'm walking away from it, but when I'm standing right underneath it doesn't connect? But I think that's where Hamina really is, adds a lot of value of you can see what's going on here. If the client had this walking path, they first associate to that AP based on how loud that AP is transmitting and how well that client can hear that AP. It's not hitting the roaming threshold. That's what Hamina is representing here in this lightly blue shaded area. That's the roaming boundary. And we can see we're not hitting that roaming boundary until we actually come around the corner here where the wall is, and it finally blocks the signal to that particular AP. To that's where the actual client ends up roaming to now this AP because it can hear this one better, and that's its best roaming candidate. So if we wanted to change that behavior, I mean, one, I don't think that's bad behavior in the sense of like, right, this is still a good user experience,
Yeah,
but I mean, if this is where the person's desk is, yeah, that's not the best user experience. Like they could be having a much better user experience. So if we want to influence that and get that client and entice it, one, we could do some drastic things because we're in the sandbox. I could say, okay, we're going to shove this AP over here. And clearly that's going to have a big change in now that behavior, right? Of like when this client does connect to that AP, it's going to roam much quicker. So you can make some very drastic changes like actually physically moving the AP, especially moving them out of like the open areas here, which is where it is going to be hard to kind of control that roaming behavior because it's in a big open area, right? So that signal is just going to propagate through there. We've already turned the power down, or RRM in this case, probably has already turned the power down. But let's say maybe we want to fine tune that and try to entice that client a little bit more. I don't usually like to go. I'm curious, maybe Harry, Dan, if you guys have input. I don't like to go below 3 dBm. I've seen ill side effects of that
yeah,
as well. If you do turn the power down too far, you get some of these kind of things, right? We're going to have some pockets of like when you go behind an object, the signal's going to drop very drastically, which might create some bad user experiences as well. Any thoughts from your side on that on like power levels?
I'm very the same. I don't tend to go like overly low. I mean, in this type of scenario, what would I do to fix it? Just give you a cable, have a cable, and be done with that. No, yeah, I agree. I mean, because the kind of sometimes when you see a client when you get like that really sort of a nose dive of signal, and then the experience is almost worse. Again, you better have. It'd be better sometimes to have that kind of a little bit sticky than it just to jump off a cliff. So
So
yeah,
I
I'm the same.
I've got two things I would do. First thing is I put the AP under the desk
Yeah,
Of
and
course you
surround
would.
it with
I knew
people.
that was coming.
yeah,
uh, and the
If
other
we
thing
can
I'd do is
simulate it, we can do
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. Well, maybe do the other one. The other thing I would do is I'd use an AP 47D
yeah,
facing down. So I would try and use, rather than it being like an Omni AP, maybe use a directional AP, but fire it from the ceiling down. Um, yeah,
But that is a
something like
really
that.
good point. Even just the aspect of, what is the height of the AP at? If we've got like 12-foot high ceilings and we have those APs up on the ceiling, um, can we bring those APs down to like 8 feet? It doesn't have a huge impact. Potentially it could, depending on, how high up the AP is and how much we're lowering it. But yeah, by bringing that AP down to the clients, it does help kind of shrink those cells a little bit. And yeah, that could help change some of that behavior, especially if it is big open environments. Try and get those APs as close to the clients as possible.
Yeah, we
the
had someone just say, what about using something like a data rate or something to help kind of do it? But again, this is where this is useful, right? Because if you put the client underneath that other AP, I'm willing to bet it's above 24 megabits per second, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, 432. So
Yeah.
you're never going to hit that minimum basic rate threshold before the device would choose to roam by itself anyway.
Yeah, so we're all the way down to MCS4, but that's still 432 megabits per second that it's able to talk to this AP at. Yeah, so I think, yeah, there's several obviously options here. I think the point of all of this at least from this webinar standpoint is that this is what I really love about going from live to simulation is once we ingest all that live data, we can now play in the sandbox. And one power or pro user kind of tip here we'll say for Hamina is I've gotten into these situations where I've tweaked a bunch of things and now I'm like, oh, what was the original like live data? You can always copy the live information here and paste that back into your simulation. So if you ever want to just reset this back to the live data, just copy the APs from like the live, paste those into your simulation, and now everything's reset back to how it's actually deployed. You could do that for just one AP, all the APs, whatever, but just so you can see how you can reset that back to the current live, so that way you can kind of reset your scenario and go back to like starting from scratch here to then make those adjustments. But yeah, lots of options that you can play with here. Obviously, I would say ideally in this situation would be I think physically moving these APs would be the most helpful because you can see just by moving this even not a huge amount, we can get some very drastic changes to that RF behavior that might give us, more of what we're wanting. Try to get our clients connecting over here to Joel's desk, for example. So you can see right now it's not going to move over there. But if I do turn this power down to like 3 dBm, and now we can see that does change that behavior to more of what we would want of when they get over to here, they will roam and give us that experience that we're looking for, I think, on this side of it. So yeah, you can kind of play around with these different knobs here to kind of help with some of that.
Yeah, Andrew,
I thought we'd spent
very
enough time on
patient
that
of you.
question and we should move on to the next one. So Kyle asked this right at the start, so he's been very patient waiting, and I'd be interested to see the answers you guys give. And I think we have to think outside of Hammer here, but is there a way to tell if an iPhone or iPad has reduced its Wi-Fi capabilities because the battery is low?
I've got one. So I actually first discovered this behavior with my involvement with like the WLAN Pi project and with playing with the WLAN Pi profiler. if you take an iPhone, or really, I think it's any iOS device, and you put it into low power mode, it will drop a spatial stream. So iPhones are typically two spatial stream devices. If you enable low power mode, that is one of the power saving benefits that it's doing, is dropping a spatial stream. So it effectively becomes a single spatial stream Wi-Fi client when you put it into low power mode. And you can see that in the packet captures, in the actual frames themselves, it'll actually show up as a one spatial stream device. So yeah, you would see that on that side of it. I'm curious, yeah, if we have any way of then, kind of drilling down into that in like the live view to see maybe if a client is running in like a low power mode. I don't think we have that capability, at least in the UI today, but theoretically that should be able to be probably pulled from some of that information, either from the vendor side or from the packet capture side.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking, is basically try and find somewhere triggering if something's gone to a lower spatial stream count. That's the only way I know.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question. This one was, the person specifically wants Harry to answer this. The only question where it said, "This is for Harry."
God.
So it's about the hair, Harry.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
No,
Yeah,
it's
that's fine. I
not.
can answer that. It's fine. I thought it was going to be technical. Oh, God.
What's the biggest mistake you see in warehouse Wi-Fi which impacts the RF guns?
So when I used to do, my previous role, before I was at Elevate, I used to do a lot of warehouse deployments, and generally, using omnidirectional APs really, really high up, that was always a problem. Never, not using a directional antenna. That was always a massive issue. Just not being designed for they haven't thought about the client device, the device that actually is going to work on the network. That was always, and I've saw some pretty amazing internal, omnis ridiculously high up, 18 meters, 20 meters. And, by the time even doing a site survey, you'd seen like barely anything by the time you're on the ground floor. And that was using a device designed to capture RF data, let alone a little Zebra handheld gun that just didn't have a clue. So that was always the big one. Not using external antennas. When I first got into Wi-Fi, I was almost a bit intimidated by using an external antenna. I don't know why. I think I assumed it was going to be so different. But then when you actually use them, they're really pretty straightforward to use, and that's what they're designed to do, is to work in these environments. So yeah, that's how I would answer that.
Good answers.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
the other thing to mention with the external antennas, and the thing that's like an important concept that I think, again, some people might not be aware of, right? Turning up and down the power levels on an AP is different to having like an external gained antenna. The difference with a gained antenna is it both sends and receives louder, right? It's a passive thing, that's so it can hear louder and it can kind of transmit louder. And I think like sometimes when people think about just turning up an AP, that's obviously still just a one-sided thing. In the same way that Jerry was talking about, when you turn down an AP too much, that's a one-sided thing. The nice thing about using antenna gain is that it's a double-sided thing. Works in both ways. Sorry, Andrew, go on.
Well, they said for Harry. They didn't say for Dan and Harry in the question.
Dan, I wasn't finished, Dan, by the way. So now you've ruined it for me. So there you go.
Right, last live question I'm going to squeeze in because we're at time. Stationary roaming, so a client that basically isn't moving but just keeps jumping between APs. What's a good way to handle that?
Anyone going to jump in?
As far as like a client that's bouncing between APs.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can be a tricky one. I mean, obviously you can do some things like we're talking about, I think, again, with like power levels. So sometimes you'll see some of that behavior. If the power is too far down, it's creating an unstable link. So the client's kind of bouncing back and forth. So you want to try to at least get it a good strong signal so that it kind of stabilizes on one AP and doesn't keep bouncing back and forth. But, ultimately the client's in the driver's seat there. So there's only so much we can do to kind of influence the client to make better decisions. But yeah, that's that can be a tricky one to troubleshoot for sure.
Yeah, I've also seen things like 802.11 V doing things like that, right? Where the AP is kicking the client off, and the client goes, "No, I want to join you," so it rejoins back on and gets kicked off, back on, gets kicked off. Andrew, do you want to talk us through that? Because you,
I really don't like 11V, but I believe my opinion on it is outdated because I've not tested it for a while. But it's exactly what I saw with an Android client. Granted, this was 6 years ago now, but it was just bouncing between APs, or even just going offline completely because it was blacklisting APs
yeah,
because it was being kicked off of it. So
and
I am
that does happen. Yeah, yeah. I think it's one of those things, right, where like 802.11v for me is only worth using if you've got a well-designed network. If you've got a poorly designed network, then 802.11v actually can just make things much, much worse. That's been my experience with it anyway.
Yeah, some good points in chat. These could be more vendor specific features that are triggering this behavior as well, not just the
Mm,
client making bad choices, but there could be something with the APs of like a load balancing feature or some kind of client, trying to improve the client experience, but in effect creating a worse client experience by bouncing the client around between APs and radios and things like that. So yeah, sometimes it's some of these kind of vendor specific implementations of a certain feature that's good intentions but creates some weird side effects.
yeah, because there's always this tension, right, isn't there? Because the client makes the decision. So if you've ever got anything on the infrastructure that's trying to enforce that decision, if the client doesn't want to play ball, it can just cause mayhem. Andrew, any
We're
more?
actually seeing something pretty similar at the minute, which I'm currently trying to investigate, which is that
Oh, really?
problem. And one of them. One of the recommendations was we were having issues with band steering. The client being told, "No, I want you to stay on 5," and the client was having a bit of a hissy fit about it, and it was weird. And that they were trying to bounce around those different APs, and and then we obviously started to adjust power and stuff. But yeah, so you do see stuff like that, but it can be a really frustrating thing to look at. Just going in and watching this a device not move and seeing it live just bounce around on the dashboard. You're like, oh my god.
Mhm.
And there was some mention about orb as well, which I guess we've kind of failed to mention all these conversations, but that can also provide us some additional insights into what that user experience is. And there's also this feature in Humina with some of the vendors where we can actually kind of bounce the client, force the client to reconnect. That's more so for like if you're seeing like a sticky client issue, like maybe the client's hanging out on 2.4, but they should be connecting on like 5 or 6 gigahertz, or maybe we just see they're too far away from an AP, and they should be roaming. So we could try to force that client to make a good roaming decision. So we could force that client to disconnect, reconnect, and then we can see if they, do connect to maybe a different AP or a different radio when the client reconnects. So you do have some options in there to try to resolve a potential client issue. But yeah, here's a good example because this is actually just a Raspberry Pi in this environment. So these can be used as sensors. In this case, we're using it as a client that's connected to the Wi-Fi, but it also happens to be running an Orb agent. So that Orb agent service running on here in the background gives us a bunch of additional insights and metrics about this user experience. So we can actually see that here over time. We can see its actual internet throughput as well as the downlink and uplink connections. So this gives us both views from this. And again, we're doing all this remotely. I'm over here in Wisconsin. This site's over here in Helsinki, Finland, and we're able to see all this kind of detail here remotely to tell me, hey, is there a problem, with the site's internet connection, with just an individual client, with a particular AP at that site? We can get all sorts of insights. And since we do have multiple clients in here, you can see each of the clients in the list here. So these are live, actual active clients connected to the Wi-Fi. And we've got 3 of them in this environment that all have the Orb agent running on them. So if I click on the particular client, we can get all sorts of details about that particular client and its user experience. So this can be really helpful also for remotely troubleshooting and seeing, maybe why users are experiencing a certain connection issue or something at that site.
Yeah, and I think we added it last week, but now you can. So, say for instance that we know that that's Raspberry Pi. We know that's not going to be walking around, right? You can now actually put that exactly where it is on the map as well. So you can use those now just with the Raspberry Pi. You can use those as sensors effectively in, if you had like a boardroom or something that you wanted to manage and make sure that you're getting a good connection all the time. You could just put a Raspberry Pi in there, stick orb on it, stick it into a thing. Now you've got a sensor that works in that environment all the time. You're constantly testing, and then you can see exactly kind of how the Wi-Fi and the internet connection's working in that space.
Yeah, it's a good point. There was also some comments about or some questions around like integration with other sensors. There's all sorts of other ones with Waybot and UXI
Seven
sensors
signal
as well
and
as
yeah.
7 Signal. So all of those would exist the same way. Like all of them would show up as a Wi-Fi client. And to Dan's point, we can position that client exactly where that is in the environment. So now we have this live statistics. So this could be a UXI sensor or 7 Signal sensor that's mounted permanently in this location. And now we get that kind of insight here that we can pull up at any point in time and see that live detail. So already today, you can utilize those different sensors that are in your environment and be able to see them, see which AP they're connecting to, what that connection experience looks like. This is independent of the orb side of things. The orb just layers in some additional insights to give us more detail about, is this a connection issue at the site level or the internet side of things. At the local gateway side, we get a better breakdown of that and some additional metrics that we can look at. Also, we get this nice little score here of what does that actual user experience look like. So just at a glance, we can kind of look at multiple potential data points and see, oh, all the users on this particular side of the building all have a low orb score or have a good orb score, or maybe all the users on a particular floor or a particular site. Seeing all those aggregated together can be really useful.
Yeah. Awesome. Right. I think we're over time. So let's let everyone kind of get some evening back or whatever, middle of the day back. Just wanted to say massive thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. Harry, thank you for coming on and giving us your insights, man. Really appreciate it.
No worries.
Thank you very much, everyone, and see you next time.